My name's Bob Cryan, and my day job is I'm Vice Chancellor of the University of Huddersfield, which is an organisation of about 20,000 students from over 100 countries, and we really do focus on giving life opportunities and life chances, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. This session, we are absolutely delighted to have outstanding panel members. First of all, we've got Resham Kotecha, Social Mobility Commissioner, with excellent. We then have Alice Maynard at the far end, Alice Maynard CBE, who is an award-winning non-exec and chair. Then we have Polly Morgan, who is winner of both the Digital Leader of the Year and Young Digital Leader of the Year, and also the director of the Inspiring Digital Enterprise Award, which has had young people complete an amazing 12 million digital badges online. And then we have Jummy, Okoya, who is the Academic Director for Inclusive Practices at the University of East London. So you please join me in welcoming the panel. I was delighted to be asked to actually come and chair the panel today, because this is something that's really shaped my whole career. I've spent the last 40 years actually trying to give people life chances and transformational opportunities. You might wonder why. Well, I think all of us were shaped by our childhoods. And my childhood was associated with being brought up in a very tough neighbourhood. It was a neighbourhood of economic migrants. My parents were economic migrants. Both of them left school at the age of 11. They had no real formal qualifications. My mother came to the UK, couldn't speak the language, couldn't read the language. It's a story that's familiar to a lot of economic migrants. And the life chances and opportunities that were made available were quite limiting. Now, what struck me as I was growing up is if it was tough for me, it was actually tougher from my friends from the West Indian community, from the Pakistani community, from the Indian community. Because I did have an advantage. I was white. And it was interesting as my life played out, particularly the earlier stages of my life, how people brighter than I was actually didn't succeed the way I succeeded. But what I also felt was a continuous prejudice in the early stages of my career, because I was brought up in the wrong neighbourhood, because I went to the wrong school. I ended up going to what was called a polytechnic back in those days, which you were actually considered second-class citizens. So I've been shaped by being made to feel second class and being angry about being made to feel second class, because that's not the society I want to live in. So I spent most of my career in the education sector trying to help transform people's lives, because what I recognise myself is that education is absolutely transformational. And I'm now in a very privileged position where I can help shape young people's minds, because I lead a university. And the starting of the shaping of those minds is to try and create self-belief and confidence. Because if I can get people to believe in themselves and have a voice, I've really helped them on their journey. And in giving them that voice, I want them to be absolutely inclusive. So those of you that have ever been to my university, what you'll see when you first walk in is a rainbow crossing. And that has gone down incredibly well with the students, because straight away there's a symbolism that says something about the institution. As you walk through University Square, on the side of a building, there's a poem called "Let There Be Peace," which again says something about the institution. But if you delve a bit further, you find that that poem was actually written by an individual called Lem Sisse, who was actually brought up in a children's home and believed his name was Norman for the first 16 years of his life, which I always find it emotional. It's just outrageous. If you keep walking down, you'll then see another extract of a poem by a poet called Maya Angelou. And it's a very powerful piece of a poem. And it says, "We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike." At our latest project, we've just built a multi-faith centre, because we want people to understand each other's faiths. Now, sadly, in my region, there was the murder of an MP called Jo Cox. Jo was an incredible person, and she really got it. She really understood that we're all important. And in her opening speech in Parliament, she says we have more in common than sets us apart. So we've actually built this building, a multi-faith building, and we've called it the Joe Cox Mourning Common Centre. Now, the reason why I'm giving you that backdrop is all of us, in our own way, are shaped by the circumstances that we were born in and that we were brought up in. Sometimes we get a chance to do something about it. I've been in a fortunate position where in my own organisation, I can influence the thinking, I can do something about it. And what today's about is sharing some of each other's stories and just trying to get a better understanding of some of the barriers that have existed. And we've all got our personal stories, and I'm hoping that people feel confident enough to share some of these and then start thinking through what can we do to break down some of these barriers. So the way that we're going to run the session, with your agreement, is that I'll invite each one of our panel members to comment on a particular question, but we would like interaction. We want everybody, you've heard this morning, it's about having a voice. We want everybody to have a voice. If you've never spoken up at a session like this before, this is your chance. This is a friendly audience. You're not going to be judged. We want to hear what you say because you are important. You have your voice. So please feel free to ask a question. And then at the end of once we've talked to the panel, I'm going to pose a question to the audience, give you an opportunity to make friends by talking to people next to yourselves, and then we'll get some feedback and we'll capture that feedback. Does that sound like a good plan? Excellent. Okay. Well, I'm actually going to start off with Resham then, if I may, please. And the first question is, why is it important to think about social mobility for women and within women's career journeys?
It's a great question. Just by a bit of background, I was one of those children of, as you can tell probably, from East Africa, but Indian immigrants who came to the UK. My dad's, they came as teenagers. They also went to a polytechnic, so very much get that. And actually, when I was at school and talking about applying to university, my friends would say, "Oh, my parents met at Oxford. My parents met at UCL. My parents did this, that, and the other." And I'd say very proudly, like, "Oh, my parents went to Kilburn Polytechnic." And at one point, my mum took me aside and said, "You don't have to keep saying that. You know, it's embarrassing," because there was the view that that meant they weren't as good as those who'd gone to university, even though my mum taught herself an English GCSE in 3 months to be able to qualify, coming from Sudan. My dad's first job was on the floor of a Wool's ice cream factory. They worked very hard, as plenty of people do, but they also got very lucky. They had access to opportunity, access to education, and great parenting. So in my current I have a day job, but my passion job is as a social mobility commissioner. That's a public appointment by the Cabinet Office a few days a month, although surprise, surprise, I do more than a few days a month because I'm so passionate about it. But it's a role where the work is to overlook the work of the commission, some very hardworking civil servants who pull together research and reports on social mobility in the UK. So I think it's helpful just to have an understanding of that. We do have a State of the Nation report that comes out every year. So if you are interested in lots and lots of data and research, that will come out in September. And what we do when we look at that is I don't really like the word class because I think that immediately puts people into higher and lower, which I think is not an appropriate term, but for lack of a better one in this case, I will talk about socioeconomic backgrounds. So what we do is we look at people's socioeconomic backgrounds and what their parents did when they were aged 14 in order to be able to classify kind of how easy it is to progress. And this is really important, particularly when it comes to women, because I'm sure none of you are surprised that intersectionality plays a huge part in this, that if you are from a less good socioeconomic background and you are a woman, you struggle more than if you are a man from that same background. And we know that this is an issue. We see that women have higher rates of educational attainment at Key Standard 2 and 4. They're more likely to attend university, but they are by every measure likely to earn less. Now, we talk a lot about the gender pay gap, and one of the other things I do is sit on the board of the Fawcett Society, so I'm very passionate about gender equality, and I work with an organisation called Women to Win to get more women elected to Parliament, because if we're not at every table, policy will not change fast enough. And people often say, oh, well, that's different career choices, that's women opting to work part-time, and some of it is explained by career choices, but those career choices are shaped very early on, as Bob said, in childhood, where if you walk into stores, clothing stores, you will look at T-shirts aimed at little boys, 5 and under, that say top scientist, world champion, and you look at the ones for girls, and they say things very sexualized. They say things like beauty queen, or here's a smile for you. And from a very young age, women are taught that that is more important than their capabilities and their work, which continues on into the subjects they choose, and therefore the earning potential, because we know that STEM subjects reward people in career places financially more. And as I said, if you want to choose to opt to go into a different career, that's fine. But we pretend women have choices when actually they are shaped from before they can even speak. And women are far less likely, according to research, to achieve upward social mobility. And that will come out in the State of the Nation report in September if you want all the detail. But we look at income, we look at housing, we look at education, and we follow women through, and men, but we follow people through their careers. So we know this isn't just at 21 or at 30, but the gap unsurprisingly widens over the period of time where women have children. And women from what's considered a traditionally working class background are far less likely than their male peers from the same socioeconomic background to get higher paid professional jobs, if that's the categorization I can use. And even when you compare women from a lower socioeconomic background to women from a higher socioeconomic background, so women, even if you take into account education, race, any other intersectionality like that, women from a lower socioeconomic class background actually face a double whammy. They are paid less than other women from kind of more privileged backgrounds. And this is important. We have more than 30 million people in the UK in paid employment. And employers have a real role to play. They decide how they recruit, what type of people they recruit, the recruitment process. They have people that will decide what the pay should be, whether you have to negotiate for your own pay or not. And surprise, surprise, if you come from a less privileged socioeconomic background, you are less able or confident to advocate for yourself, to ask for a higher salary. If you're earning more than your entire household has ever earned before, you're much more likely to go, well, that's great. That's more than my parents have ever seen, rather than recognizing that that skill set and that achievement level deserves more payment. And on the Social Mobility Commission, we know that government can't do it alone, which is why it's so great that the CMI and all of you are here, because actually this requires group work. It's things like when you have a DE&I strategy, collect data on socioeconomic background. And it doesn't have to be about that person as an individual. That can be uncomfortable for people to share. But give the opportunity for the data to be collected. Don't pressure people, but you can collect data. Consider how you introduce that into your talent pool. Are you reaching out to people from different backgrounds? Are you taking into account that someone's accent or where they grew up, or whether they have kind of mental or physical needs that are different to kind of yours? Are you taking that into account? And collect, analyze, and measure that data. And interestingly, don't assume that your lived experience is the same as anyone else's, even though lived experience is so important. I went to a UN Women event talking about career progression, and I sat at a table with 11 other ethnic minority women, and the question was posed to us: has your sex, your gender, made more of an impact to you than your ethnicity? And I was the only person that felt that being a woman had impacted my career more than being Indian. And I said, oh gosh, isn't that interesting? I would have thought we would have all agreed, and it's 11 of you and 1 of me. And a woman next to me turned to me, and I mean, this was not tactfully put, but she said to me, well, obviously it doesn't make a difference to you. You've whitewashed yourself. I bet when you speak to people on the phone, they don't even realize you're Indian. And apart from the fact it was a kind of not an appropriate way to put that, and quite insulting, I kind of thought, well, actually, you're right. I grew up in London in a very diverse place. I don't have kind of an ethnic minority accent. I dress just like most other Londoners. And so even though I didn't like the way she made the point, it was accurate in terms of I had a different lived experience. And just wrapping up, we know that women from professional backgrounds earn 23% on average higher than their peers from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And we know that hiring practices can create barriers. So do think about what you're doing there, and do think about being part of that change and getting in allies whatever the background is, we need allies at every level as women, and when we think about socioeconomic background. I assume that
That's brilliant. Now, this is the icebreaker moment, and ideally somebody that hasn't spoken at an event like this before. Who recognises that story, and how do you relate it to your own story? Who would like to go first?
Hi, I'm Tanya Aiken, I'm actually with CMI. I thought your point around, children's T-shirts, that, when you see the boys' T-shirts saying they can, superstar this or whatever it might be. I actually attended one of my children's Mother's Day assemblies a couple of years ago, and it's a school which has quite a diverse mix of children. There's quite a high proportion of children receiving pupil premium. And in the Mother's Day assembly, they were singing, "My mum's 1 in a million. She may not have a degree, but she cooks and cleans and makes a nice tea." And that was exactly my reaction. And so I just wonder what role businesses can play to work with our education systems to make sure that we're not instilling this unconscious bias within our children of what they can go on to become.
I'll possibly ask you to pick up on education.
Yep.
What I will say, if you are interested, have a look at the Fawcett Society's work on gender norms, because this is so problematic. It's the way little girls develop motor skills on average quicker than boys. And so what parents and society does, without meaning to do anything bad, they say to little girls things like, "Oh, aren't you pretty? Aren't you good? Aren't you nice? Aren't you well behaved?" Things that are very black and white. You either are or you aren't. And we say to boys things like, "If you just tried a little bit harder, if you just concentrated a bit more." And what we embed in children is that girls either can do something or can't do something, which means very often when they first hit something that they can't do, they think, "Oh, I'm bad at this." Whereas boys have been taught for years, keep trying and you'll get better. And we are teaching boys to be more resilient and more confident in their own abilities than we are girls from a very young age. In terms of, I would say that's a very conscious bias, and probably what's disappointing is that there will have been female teachers and male teachers in the room who are teaching that and should know better. I think businesses can do a huge amount in terms of supporting education. Going into schools, I've stood for Parliament twice. I went to a school with a male MP several years ago, and he is a great guy, a Caucasian male whose father was also an MP, quite well off. And interestingly, people said, "Oh, well, I couldn't see myself getting there because I don't have the connected father or the money." But actually, having a woman who was of an Indian background standing there, they were like, "Oh, well, that I can see, that I can do." So if you are a business, go to schools, but recognize as well that you are putting kind of a burden on your female staff or on your ethnic minority staff or your staff from a different socioeconomic background. Recognize that that kind of voluntary work is often not rewarded in the workplace. So don't cart them off there to make your business look good if you don't reward that work as time taken out of their working day, because often I see women penalised for doing the soft skills or the PR for the business, and make sure that you are rewarding that. And do make the men go do it too, by the way. They shouldn't be the only ones sitting at the desk doing all the schmoozing. So I'd say that, and then also work with schools to support them on some of the skills around the academia. So go into schools, especially in deprived areas, and teach them interview skills, because you get that at lots of private schools. You don't get that so much at the state schools. So be a part of lifting communities up.
I think one of the challenges when you're from that kind of background, the background I've come from and Resham's come from, is you just don't have the social capital. You don't have the network. And this is where I think the CMI is really powerful, because being a member of the CMI, immediately you've got access to a network of like-minded people that understand your journey and will actually help you on the journey. I think that's one of the most powerful things that CMI actually offers. It kind of levels that social capital playing field. So very, very powerful. Could I just ask any other questions for Resham? If not, I'll bring Alice in, if I may. And Alice, What are some of the most effective strategies that employers can use to attract talent from diverse backgrounds?
So thank you, Bob, for the question. I have to say, it's not the right question.
Oh, ooh.
I'm not planning on answering it.
We did rehearse this. We did rehearse this, by the way.
It's a question I hear all the time, and I just, it's one of the times where I go, I wish people wouldn't still talk about that stuff. I wish we still weren't talking about this stuff. See, I don't think you should be getting behind people and pushing them into your organization. I think you need to change your organization from the inside so that the pull, the magnetic pull of your organization as a really truly inclusive organization is what draws people in. There are people out there. When you say, how do we attract all these people? I mean, I used to work in disability equality, and there was always the question was, there aren't any disabled people out there. How do we get them in? And you'd think there are loads of disabled people out there. You're just not doing it the right way, love. So I was, and I was recently appointed as chair of the Council of University of York. And one of the things that attracted me there is its long-standing commitment to encouraging students from what we can collectively call disadvantaged backgrounds to study at the university. And that's one of its founding principles. That was in the 1960s, and it was therefore 60 years ago. And I keep asking myself, why is this stuff taking so long? And I give you three things to think about, really, about changing the inside of the organization. The first thing is the culture. So, I mean, let's say you're successful in recruiting someone from a diverse background. How easy is it for them to understand and communicate what it's really going to take for them to give their best work? So how receptive are we inside that organization to making any changes that they need? And how long does it take us to implement them? Because sometimes we go, oh, yes, very important, we can do that. But it takes us forever to get it sorted. It's got to be a policy change. It's got to be approved by somebody. We need to get more flexible. So we may ask people, what do they need an adjustment? And actually, that's usually only to openly disabled people these days. But if they don't really know, if you don't know what the job entails, then how can you possibly say what you need adjusted in order to be able to do it well? So we need people to be to understand what they're doing and be able to constantly ask along the way, if I can do this, or if I can do it this way, I can do it better. And we need to be able to let people do that. And one of the problems people have is that if you feel different and you feel you are underperforming for whatever reason that is, because you can't get what you need in order to be able to do your best work, then somehow you feel you're letting the side down. They're going to think badly of all disabled people because I can't do this well enough. And it's difficult for people to thrive if they're like that. And if people aren't thriving, it's like having an unhappy customer. Others are going to find out, and it's going to start spreading. People won't come to your organization if they don't feel it's somewhere they can thrive. So that's number one. We need to look at the way that we receive people into the organization and how we help them deliver their best work. And then it's about low expectations. And because we think it's hard to do this stuff. So we don't expect people to apply, or we don't recognize when they try and apply. And our understanding of people from diverse backgrounds is often dogged by, there was a woman called Susan Daniels who was an advisor to Bill Clinton, and she called it the soft bigotry of low expectation. So you're not expecting much of the people that come in. So, oh, we're doing a nice job here for letting people with learning difficulties come in, or, you know, apprenticeships with people with autism, or whatever it happens to be. But your expectations of what they're going to be able to deliver are quite low. And so therefore, it's harder to deliver if people's expectations of you are low. We need to raise our expectations of ourselves and our ability to make these changes, because sometimes we think, oh, it's so difficult, I'm never going to be able to make that change. Our organization is never going to be able to change. We need to raise our expectations of ourselves and of the others. And the third thing is that kind of reluctance to talk about difference. I sometimes get a bit shirty, actually, when I get shirty a lot, you'll find. When people say to me, I say that people who are disabled on boards of companies should say so. Because if what we're saying is we want inclusive cultures, then actually we need people to see that we have inclusion at senior levels. And if you're not prepared to come out as a disabled person, then actually what's that about? So that makes, and then people start talking about how it's terribly personal. Well, yeah, okay. Is it really? I mean, if you really want to be inclusive, then surely it's better to say, I mean, I'm a white, older, very much older, disabled woman. I'm a Christian. I'm straight. You can have the lot as far as I'm concerned. And yes, if you're storing my data, I would quite like you to store it confidentially. But actually, I don't see why I should keep it hidden if what I say is I want a diverse and inclusive organization. Then I need to be leading the way in making that happen. So talking about this stuff is really important. And we need to be more courageous, I think. And we may be afraid of saying the wrong thing and offending people. And I think that's something all of us experience. And people are afraid of speaking out because they don't want to jeopardize their chances, which I think is fairer, actually, because it can jeopardize your chances. So if I give you a little anecdote, it took me 10 years in work before I acknowledged in work that I was a disabled person. And that may sound strange because you kind of can't miss it. I mean, I've always been a wheelchair user, so I'm visibly disabled. But the drive to fit in and be at least as good as everybody else, if not better, in order to make up for the fact that I was a disabled person and kind of compensate in some way for them letting me have a job in the first place, it was so strong that I did not kind of, admit's the wrong word, but I did not allow that I was a disabled person. And so I didn't ask for what I needed. So I just fought my way through. And it was actually the HR director of my company telling me I couldn't get any further that jolted me into recognizing that I'm a disabled person. And so it's exhausting pretending to be normal, whatever you think normal is. And we should all stop pretending to be normal and start asking for what we need.
That's very well said, Alice. I mean, I guess the obvious question is what role do leaders play in bringing about these changes?
So I think leaders need to lead from the top. So I talked about people being afraid of jeopardizing their chances if they say who they are or say what they need. And I think that's right, and it's fair enough when you're working your way up the organization. But when you're leading at the top of the organization, I think it is absolutely obligatory to say, do you know what? This is who I am, and this is what I need. And it's still not that easy to do. And when I first got board roles, it was quite challenging for me to go, actually, I want a 15-minute break and don't you dare cut it down, because I need to pee and it takes that long. But it's really important that I say those sorts of things so that other people who experience those sorts of things can also say so. When I was growing up, my role model was Michael Flanders, who most of you have probably forgotten or didn't ever know, but he was a wheelchair user. He was the only wheelchair user that I knew, apart from my sister. So therefore, he was my role model. But he's a bit of a weird role model. We as leaders need to be the role models that people need in order to be what they can see.
Thank you. Thanks, Alice. I'll bring Polly in next, because what Polly's got to say kind of links the two previous speakers. So, Polly, how do you think we can open up opportunities and access people with low academic attainment or disabilities so that their background doesn't have to be a barrier to their success to work?
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, and I'm really pleased that you both have said what you've said, and this kind of echoed some of what we heard this morning as well, because the first point that I wanted to talk about really was the importance of role models. This, you can't be what you can't see, and people aren't always aware of all the different opportunities that there might be available to them. And so it's really important that the next generation particularly see people like them, people that they can identify with in successful careers, in leadership positions, and then that should help raise their aspirations so they can think, well, that might be me too. And it's what's been said here, and it's what's been said this morning. And I think thinking about those with kind of lower attainment at school and who haven't come out with the best grades, it's because they didn't get on necessarily with the standard current formal educational provision. And that's not that person's fault. That is our fault for not making sure that it fits and suits their needs. And actually their confidence, particularly around learning, is likely to be much lower. So I think, we need to support and to help keep people learning throughout their lives, especially if they're going to keep up with the pace of the changing world of work and technology and things like the generative AI and tech that we heard about earlier. So we've got to make it easy for people to get reacquainted with learning. And I think we need to reward people to show them what they've learned and how that can help them in the future as well. So one of the things that we do on IDEA, so I run the Inspiring Digital Enterprise Award, as Bob mentioned earlier. So we help make learning fun, free and flexible. Free, so that the cost isn't a barrier to entry. Fun, so Bob has a brilliant way of describing it. In fact, Bob's chair of the Board of Trustees of IDEA. And he describes it as learning by stealth. So particularly for those that are underconfident, haven't got on so well with learning in the past, it's that, how do we bring them in and re-engage those people? So yeah, we've got to make it fun, and it has to be flexible, because we've got to meet people where they are, and they've got to be able to do it at a time and a pace that suits them. So one of the other things as well to help really build up that confidence is to reward people. So I talked about showing them what they've learned and what that can do for them. That again helps with role models, looking at who's gone before and what they've now been able to achieve. But again, so on IDEA, we reward people with digital badges, so micro-credentials for the chunks of fun, bite-sized learning that they complete. And these are all added up and they count towards unlocking a bronze, silver or gold award. So a bit like a Duke of Edinburgh award, if anyone here knows about that or has done that. But that reward mechanic is really helping the person also then to demonstrate their skills to an employer. And there's a real, I think, difficulty and challenge for people to demonstrate their skills and the kind of the informal learning that they've been doing along the way to employers. And I think that, again, there's there needs to be just better recognition, better celebration of the learning that people are doing in their own time, off their own backs, informally. And again, yeah, meeting people where they are. And one of the brilliant ways that we can do this, technology can be such an enabler for learning, for upskilling people, for helping to reach people who might be harder to reach. But you know, it's really, really vital that we aren't leaving people behind, as the pace of change is so fast nowadays, and we risk more people getting left behind. And so the kind of last point that I want to try to talk about now is just really how vital it is that we end digital poverty. So the Digital Poverty Alliance, I sit on the community board for them. They define digital poverty. I have to look at my notes, so I don't want to say the wrong definition, not their exact one. So the DPA defined digital poverty as the inability to interact with the online world fully when, where, and how an individual needs to. So now more than ever, not having access to the digital world means not having access to some of the most fundamental things in life, like healthcare, jobs, education, communication. And personally, I feel it's shameful, really, that in this country that has so much wealth and so much opportunity, that digital poverty is a problem that we even have to talk about. How are we going to solve and overcome it? It shouldn't exist. It's a problem that I fear is only going to grow in the winter, particularly, you know, with the cost of living crisis. We were talking about families who were having to choose between heating and eating, and those families have already most likely chosen to disconnect the broadband connection because it's not affordable. So digital exclusion can exacerbate existing inequalities, and it can also introduce some new ones. And then there are more than 10 million people in the UK that are without the essential digital skills. And I pulled out some stats as well from the DPA evidence review. And that is that there are over 1.7 million households that are offline. This is in the UK today. And 1 in 5 children who had been homeschooled in 2021 during the pandemic did not have access to an appropriate device. And then this one, which really is staggering, is for internet non-users aged between 16 and 24 years old. 60% of them were disabled in 2017, which is a proportion that is the same again for those aged 75 years and older. So to me, ending digital poverty is not necessarily the solution on its own to all of the problems, but digital poverty is such a huge barrier that is further preventing people from accessing opportunity and being able to achieve success.
I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. That's who should be responsible?
So yeah, it's a joined up approach. I think there's some really wonderful work being done by governments and by employers, I think, and there's a role that kind of everybody can play all together. There is other organisations like IDEA, other charities who can be involved. And I think if employers are able to identify some of the skills gaps that they have within their organisations and start thinking about who they want to hire, they can work together with training providers and other organisations to upskill individuals. But then we need to work together with governments and local authorities to identify individuals that could benefit the most from receiving help. And kind of get help building the talent pipeline so that it grows and is more fair and equal for everyone.
Well, thank you, Paula. Education providers are part of that landscape. So if I bring Jummy on and ask the question, how can education providers become student ready by ensuring equity of outcomes and creating multiple channels of career opportunities for students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds?
Thank you, Bob. I want to start by telling a very, very short story about myself. So the university where I'm currently, I'm the academic director for inclusive practices. I joined that university as a student in 1999. And I remember back then being just 2 of us being Black students in the class. Each time I speak up to ask a question, the whole room had to turn because of my accent, because I had just come from Nigeria then. And I remember not having a particularly good experience, but I had just one lecturer, a woman who was just interested in everything about me. I think she could see that I was struggling. And I would go to her and she'll give me this extra time and she would, ask me a question. Are you going to be able to submit your assignment? To cut the story short, I finished with a distinction and I was offered a teaching position straight after my master's. Now, I can't take credit for the hard work alone because that woman gave me extra attention. That stayed with me. I ended up becoming a lecturer at this university. I've been there now for 23 years. Before joining this role that I started in January this year, I've been a lecturer for 22 years. Now, my experience with that lecturer has really shaped how I interacted with my own students, particularly those from a marginalized group, understanding that they have that extra baggage or challenges that they're dealing with that they don't even believe anyone cares or somebody would want to listen to them. I did put down a few points that I want to kind of use to support my presentation to you. The university has done a good job of using widening participation to actually attract students from different backgrounds, which is great. But what we haven't quite mastered is when we bring them in, how do we nurture them to make sure that there is that equitable outcome for all students, because of almost kind of moving into a commercial model of let's get as many students in, and then, we'll think about how we take care of them once we get here. My understanding and my own, my desire is that we should start thinking of how we bring them in, how they move in, even before they arrive, how we support them moving through the system, and how we support them beyond when they're with us. So it's the moving in, moving through, and moving out of the university. We've got to be part of that process because we know that success for our students is a combination of the ability of the student. So when we give them the admission, we've almost kind of confirmed that they have the ability to succeed on the program. Now, the other two components of the success ingredient then becomes motivation and the situational factors. We as education providers have responsibility of making sure that we create a nurturing environment where motivation then comes naturally to them, but also the situation, the environment, the environmental factors that allows them to succeed, and making sure that that equitable outcome becomes a burning desire for everyone that engages with the student, not just the academics, but the professional services that are dealing with students. I also want to share this with you. The factors that I've found that in order for universities to become student ready ourselves is to think about moving away from the deficit model, because oftentimes we think about the students not being able to thrive in our environment, but we should be thinking of what are we doing that is actually stopping them from thriving. So if we want to be student ready, we've got to relook at our policies, our practices. I was sharing an example with someone over lunch about having examination during Ramadan. Now, it took one student to mention it at a student success committee to say, for one, can you please move exam away from the month when we have Ramadan going on? Because a lot of them just simply stay away from the exams without coming to us. So what I'm presenting here is, in order to include everyone and to make excellence inclusive, that is excellence believable and achievable for all students, we need to look at ourselves. What environment are we creating? What practices and policies do we have? Do we have leadership behaviors that support students to succeed? Do we create an environment where students feel comfortable and confident to come to us with the intention that whatever they're presenting, we're not just listening, we're going to action it? And those are all the factors we need to bring on board in terms of demonstrating that student-ready behaviors. Rather than expecting students to shape into our environment, we should be the one asking them, what do you need in order to succeed, in order for them to come through our environment and coming out on the other side succeeding. And I did put down some principles of being a student-ready university. We need to demonstrate student-ready behavior. So our leaders need to be committed and be supportive of student success. the willingness to challenge and review our policies, our practices, and the culture that is prevalent in our universities, and to look at ways that we can alleviate the barriers to success for the student. But also to think of partnering with students. Do we include them in the conversation? Again, I was talking to someone over lunch and I mentioned the fact that there are committees where we determine the experience of our students, but we don't even bring them into the conversation. We're deciding about them, but we're not asking them. And it only took us inviting the president of the student union into that committee. And the ideas he was sharing with us were so simple and obvious to them, but it wasn't obvious to us because we're not students. We don't go through what they go through. So we need to be ready to encourage student belonging. So giving them an environment where they feel that they belong by showing consistent empathy and compassion. So as an academic, when a student stands in front of you, are you believing them? Or do you start from a point of, I'm not sure what you're telling me is true? So we are the ones who need to be ready for the student, not the other way around. I mentioned about inclusive excellence, making excellence possible for everyone, not just, so again, I was sharing the statistics with somebody over the lunch, the lady I was speaking with, that we have, my university, for example, we've got 75% global ethnic majority students, and the remaining 25% being white. Now, in terms of attainment, we've got over 80% of good degree award going to the minority students. So what I mean by that is, so the whites then that forms the minority group within the university are the ones who are getting more than 80% of first class. So why is it that the remaining 75%, the global ethnic majority, aren't achieving the same level of excellence as the other group? So in my new role, I'm looking at what can be done, working with the deans and working with the heads of schools to look at experiences of students. How can we make sure that there is that level playing field and an expectation and that believability that success is available for all of them? So what we are doing as higher education and education providers is to look at when we bring them in, are we then making sure that we create the right soil for them to flourish and to flower and achieve success.
That's very well said, Jummy. I think what we've heard is some practical thoughts on how we actually start to turn the corner on exclusion. I think what would be great in closing is if colleagues could just spend a few minutes talking to each other and then share some of their thoughts, because these are just some examples. There's a rich set of experience in the room. So I think we're a bit short of time. So if we just take a couple of minutes and then some quick fire comments would be very, very helpful. Those of you that are on SlideCo can pop something onto SlideCo as well, please. So 2 minutes, if that's okay. Please, talk. Just in closing, we just welcome some comments from the audience, any immediate thoughts that you've got. And I need that brave soul to go first. So who's going to go first? Excellent. Well, you, sir. As a minority male in the room.
That's absolutely okay. Hi, everyone. Hello. And thank you for the... Oh, it's okay. I think I'm audible enough. So, my name is Tanish. So my name is Tanish, and let me just tell you a brief history about me. So I came to the UK back in 2020 when the COVID was there to complete my master's in business analytics from the University of East London itself. So, and from that, I had my fair share of experiences coming and experiencing the exclusion of where I come from India, and they say, when I landed over here, the first few questions in the first 6 months are, how's your English so good? Like, okay, first of all, I didn't reply to, like, I already had my education back in India in English and Hindi as well. The only thing which I thought about is that you do not know that you do not know the history of the world and what happens around the world. Okay, so you need to educate yourself. Secondly, but agreeing to the panel which you and the points which you have raised in education. Right now, I'm working as a lecturer. I work as a module leader and a lecturer at Seacoast College in a partnership with Staffordshire University. And from a lecturer point of perspective, I teach students like people who have come from a country where the first language is not English as well. And the point, Yami, you raise is like, yes, we need to make students more inclusive in throughout their process. But what education institutions are not realizing that you are just not making money out of them and not making them, giving the right skills to actually make them better understand that what inclusivity is. Leave inclusivity. I remember I had a discussion in my class where we talked about the gender issues and everything. Most of the guys and most of the women, they do not even know the issues are there. They are so very well, I would say, nilted in the fact that these are normal lives. These are the normal day scenarios. They are not even made aware of the situations and their talents in their real life, which they can go about it. So as an educational institution, I must say that education needs to be, I think education needs to be a bit more strengthened in a fact that the leaders has to acknowledge their leadership qualities and get into action rather than just talking about it. So this is one of the facts.
I think at the back there, please. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Murray. We was having a bit of discussion about this in the inclusion. I get a bit confused about it because I believe it's a very deep, very, very deep place. When you try to kind of like get in discussion, because I have a little boy, he's 10 years old. That's how deep inclusion is. And he comes to school one day and he said, "Mommy, boys are meant to be dirty." And I said, "No, Raf." I was doing something when because he always grabbed me when I'm doing something. And my hair was bent down and I smiled. And then I said, "Wow, this is." I never said that to my son, that boys are meant to be dirty. I have a girl as well, and then Rihanna is meant to be clean, and Raphael meant to be dirty. No, so he must have got that from school and all of that. And I said, "No, Raphael, boys are not meant to be." But now he's 10 years old. I've been observing him since he asked me that question. He's getting more like, before he goes to bed, he's gonna run and go and grab a shower. And then I just said, "Raphael, just use the flannel. No, you have to grab the scrub to be scrubbing his skin because he doesn't want to be dirty coming to bed." Like he have that in his head that boys are meant to be, so he doesn't like it. He doesn't like the fact that I don't even know how to say it. It's going around in his brain like a chemical flora that boys are meant to be dirty. So he's scrubbing his skin out and saying, "No, Mommy," as me said, and he said, "Mommy, no, boys ain't meant to be dirty." I said, "No, Raf, boys ain't meant to be dirty." So because he hearing it at school, or I don't know, wherever environment he's hearing it from, I can't really come up with label right now. But is this, like that's what I was trying to say about the unconscious bias. People see things.
I think you're absolutely right. What we're seeing there is at a very, very young age that mind is being shaped, shaped in the wrong direction, and that's just wrong.
There's a lady
It's
in the
everywhere.
black
It's
top.
popular culture. If
Yeah.
you watch movies, if you read books, you will often see the default powerful positions of male. You will see that nurturing positions of female. You will see boys will be boys and all of that stuff. And just one sentence: read "Invisible Women" if you haven't already, by Caroline Criado Perez. I'm glad there are nods. Chapter by chapter, because it's infuriating, but you will see that the default for power is male, and the other is us, with a few exceptions for you. But yeah, it's really sad that your son feels that.
I'm being given the old at the back there, so I've got to bring it to a close. But can you please join me in thanking the panel? And can I just thank you for making the session so special? We really do appreciate your input, and please go and enjoy coffee.
I do hope that you'll be the reason I'll come again to Milton Keynes.